Hello, and welcome to the podcast called Trustworthy AI De Risk Business Adoption of AI. It is, even though the primary audience is business, this is a podcast that really reaches out to how to de risk adoption of AI for in society at large and globally in general. I'm talking to a very special guest, Yonah Welker. Yonah is a technologist and policy observer. You see posts from him on LinkedIn very prolifically, and I'm really excited to talk to you, Yonah. Please welcome and please introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And as you correctly mentioned, my name is Yonah Welker, and I'm serving for European Commission, evaluating a variety of funds, technology, and policy projects specifically related to medical, educational, assistive technologies, algorithms, and system addressing individuals with disabilities, cognitive, sensory, and physical impairments. And basically, EU is known as a very strong player, creating systems supporting visual impairments, hearing impairments, special tablets for children with disabilities, specific supportive in social robotics, and many other technologies. And my work is assessing these technologies and investments in this field. And last year, I had opportunity to quite prolifically contribute my suggestions to Artificial Intelligence Act, Digital Services Act, and special frameworks focus on protection of these groups, helping to balance innovation and social protection in medical, educational, and social areas. And they also, I'm a technologist and humanitarian and policy expert myself, working on different projects in EU, Middle East, and globally. Specifically, I'm presented in such markets as Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and we working on cross cooperations, helping to create the common ground in policies and adoption in AI algorithms and systems. So we provide special meetings and consultations as well.
Wow, that is a lot. That's a big charter, and very, very interested to dive more into it. Um, like to get a better sense for how would you define your main focus, right? You mentioned you are a technologist. You're heavily influencing public policy. You are very involved in these conversations. Is it more on the side of algorithmic fairness? Can you give a little bit more insight into that, Yona?
Yes, so first of all, I've been entrepreneur myself almost 15 years, and I built companies and technology companies myself, and I still have equity in technology companies. And nowadays, my focus as a technologist is algorithms supporting cognitive disabilities, such as autism, dyslexia, attention deficit, neurodisabilities. And basically, I presented both as a technologist, entrepreneur, and stakeholder in these companies. So is my main focus, and this focus drive my active advocacy because on one hand, people in this area are dramatically underrepresented. 80% of people on the autism spectrum are not employed. Only 10% of them have access to accessible technologies due to the lack of affordability or complexity of adoption and so on. And basically, being entrepreneur, technologist, and patient myself, having neurodisability, led me to be more kind of a technology activist initially, and later cooperating with the government as an evaluator, policy activist, and evangelist of this technology. So, but I'm entrepreneur and technologist first, and now also logically connected to this policy work. But along with that, we're actually becoming more and more active in cultural projects.
Okay.
2 years ago, I had the opportunity to curate the Global AI Summit for the Good of Humanity in Saudi Arabia, Riyadh. And it was focused not only on technology and policy, but also arts. experiential technologies, special spaces, and exhibition. So my goal is to build the dialogue between policymakers, governors, technologists, and tell them the story of assistive technologies supporting people with disabilities, both in terms of a potential of these systems, but also how we could make it in the ethical, human-centered way. So it's been both about being technologists and build these technologies, but also about how we achieve fairness, accountability, and transparency for these systems and algorithms in this area.
That's really interesting. So there are two aspects to it, right? The way I'm reading it and hearing it. So want to tell you what my understanding is. I'd like to clarify that. So in terms of when I'm thinking of algorithmic fairness for democratizing it for a across the board, right? Regardless of the whether it's children with disabilities or gender or race or a kind of having identifying bias and removing it in mainstream technology as is being developed in when it comes to AI. That's one. And the other is what you also I'm hearing from what you're saying is developing technology that can be help the population with that disability, for example. Is that correct?
Yes, on one hand, but in our work is the most difficult thing is not even definition. And I agree with you that we should achieve fairness and accessibility in building these technologies first in order to achieve social fairness. And also, we need to achieve algorithmic fairness
Mhm.
when we talk about the bias, the auditing these systems, and creating right policy frameworks. But the most difficult thing is to be realistic to actually deliver this result. Why? Because due to the complexity of these conditions, many of these people were historically underrepresented in statistic, in data sets, in medical research. There is a complexity driven by age, gender, ethnicity, so what we call intersectionality of these medical conditions, or what we call comorbidity. Then along with the one condition we can find another condition, make it more complex. Also, we can find that in different regions, let's say in Saudi Arabia in comparison to Europe, we can find that the same condition can be manifested differently. So we need to create this strong cooperation between medical institution first, social scientists, and then AI community. It can be solved only through the level of a technology and algorithms, but through medical, educational, institutional cooperation first. That's why one of the most important thing, not just to build these definitions, but right objectives, tools, and goals. What and how we can achieve it.
Yes, I agree. I agree that it goes hand in hand, right? Knowing what the problem is and then having a solution for it, right?
Exactly.
Yes, I agree. So give me an idea of how do we approach this challenge, or how, what is your vision and your the direction you're taking in solving for this challenge? Give me an idea basically on the policy side, but also on the practical aspect, right? Who needs to be involved? If you're talking about algorithmic fairness, for example, how do you get that into the hands of those who are creating these systems, right?
Yes. So, unfortunately, I believe the answer and the result can be achieved only through algorithmic spectrum. So, my personal belief and opinion that the solution can be found on actually in more economic way, and I would love to clarify what I mean. I believe until we have a equal multipolar world where we have countries, alliances of institutions which are economically equal, economic and also socially presented equally in the research, we can achieve further progress.
Mhm.
So until we have very strong institutions in Central Africa, in the Middle East, in Latin America, and all of these institutions, researchers are presented equally, and they have an equal capacity to contribute to this global work. We actually can solve these issues, and it will always be kind of a populism, because we will take very small part of infraction of the evidence, but it will be always quite limited and biased. Is the first thing is achieving this economic and social justice at the level of institutions globally is the first thing. Second thing is identification all of these parameters which affect that outcomes. Let's take the autism as an example. There are a few parameters which are critical. The first is a gender. For instance, girls are diagnosed 4 times less than boys, not because they can be presented with autism, but because they have a different manifestations. So we should have this representation per gender. Second, there are age-specific criteria, and we need this piece of studies related to how we could treat or address this condition depending on the age. Third, there is a spectrum specific criteria. There are individuals who are cognitively well, but are not capable to be good in communication. And vice versa, there are people, let's say, who are more cognitively affected, but have a good communication ability. And this spectrum is not linear, but very complex. Also, there are things driven by ethnicities and so on. And as logically connected to the point number one, when we have this equal and well presented institutions in different parts of the world with the pieces and portions of the research, we could connect it together, because alone we can do it. We can. It's not. We're not able to do it because it's such a significant research. There are so many layers. So only working together we could achieve it. And then we have this, we are able to actually reshape the framework.
Okay.
And with what I'm actively work last year, I had opportunity to contribute, yes, small piece, but still the lens of a disability and cognitive impairments to the most critical framework in AI, World Health Organization, generative AI in health, or UNESCO AI in education, or OECD AI in labor and workplaces. So as we have this knowledge, we can add it to existing policy or multilateral framework connecting all of the researchers, technologists, and adopters together. In the same way, we created the repository of existing technologies driven by AI in supporting disabilities. Now it's over 120 technologies, and you can find it publicly. So it's available for everyone. So governments, investors, adopters, educators can actually have access to it. And another thing after that, it's actually adoption everywhere. In the past, I work on adoption of dyslexia solutions. It's schools of Denmark. It was a quite successful, but it was a very interesting experience in terms of how complex the curriculums, the adoption process behind the technology. It's sometimes more complex than the building technology itself. And that's why, for instance, if you will see companies building robotics for autism. There's a very good example
Right.
in the United States. This company called Robokind from Texas, and we had the opportunity to cooperate and exhibit them in Saudi Arabia a few years ago. This company positioned themselves as a learning companies. Why? Because in order to create the instruction for teachers, for educators, you need to spend a lot of time. And it's even more complex than build the robot itself. They spent 10 years building the robots, but now they're focused on how to adopt it properly, how to create this instruction for the parent, for the child, for the teachers. In the same way, I work on technology and company called Beamy.ai, and I still have shares in this project. It's a dashboard which help to collect the data about well-being of a child on the spectrum. And there is a one dashboard for the child and another one for the parent. So once again, it's an example how one system have actually two interfaces, and you need to be very smart how this interface should look like. And that's why recently UNESCO issued the framework AI literacy and skills for students and teachers. And in October, I had the opportunity to present for UNESCO, and we had a very good discussion how complex this process of building capacity of AI. We have this system, but how we could embrace it, not only as a professionals, not only as a developers, but as a digital citizens, as a students, as a teachers, and so on. So it's the stage number four, where we're also trying to address it.
So let me unpack that, right? So you're saying that one is the side of building this technology, but the other is adoption in a way that can be beneficial and can be understood, right? What is the value, and how are you going to um, extract that value from the system, such as the robotics, the one that you mentioned? I had read about that, and I thought that was a very interesting. There was a study that was done, and in fact, I wanted to ask you about that, where autistic children felt that it seemed that they were adopting and more comfortable with robots as educators or as companions, and they were trying to find out why that was the case, right? Why did they feel more comfortable? Because maybe it was more easy, the kind of expressions and the range of expressions was lower, right? So it was good, bad, like happy or sad, right? Easier to read and interpret the emotions or the feedback, perhaps. But that was very. So yes, so the point that I wanted to highlight there was, yes, I understand that there will be differences in adoption, in difference in the demographics and who's adopting it. And what you're talking about is very interesting, and I think the timing of it is certainly really crucial, because as we are building out the technology and it becomes more and more mainstream, the time to look for and identify what are these factors, what needs to be similar and what needs to be different, and for what population, that's extremely important now. So which brings me to the EU AI Act, right, which is currently going into finalizing, or it has been finalized. Some of the things that we talked about is, what are some categories that the EU AI Act prohibits, when it comes to things such as emotion recognition. And I can see how that plays such a big role in this particular section, sub demographic that we are talking about. So let's talk a little bit about that. What are your views on the categories that EU AI Act prohibits? What are they? And firstly, right? And what's your opinion on that?
Yes. So first of all, initially, the Artificial Intelligence Act was proposed in 2021, and since then, it received so many commentary, feedback, sometimes criticism, and it's actually quite changed. For instance, a few months ago, I had opportunity to work on the program focused on building the disability-centered algorithms, and AI Act was a part, an example of it. And actually, since the building of the program, the A Act changed. So I would be focused on the last deal and the recent provision, which was actually signed and shared with the member states, and will become the part of the technology ecosystem and used by EU evaluators. So, first of all, the Commission introduced the four main categories and also a few specific articles and uh, um, definitions, which also I will comment as well. So, first of all, there is a prohibited system and unacceptable risk. which basically encompass real-time biometrics, social scoring, and systems in public spaces. And what changed here in comparison to previous provisions is a more specific and more commentary and descriptions related to scenarios. So now the Commission highlight four main cases when it specifically should be prohibited. Is it immigration? Is it law enforcement injustice? Is it educational institutions? And is it workplaces? And here we actually had a lot of discussion because if we talk about biometrics and emotion recognition systems, it can be used by people with disabilities and supporting disabilities. And in this category of unacceptable systems include both biometrics and emotion recognition. So currently we have some discussion about this is the first thing. Second thing, there are some exceptions, and the commission provide the list of the very narrow cases typically related to terrorism and very dangerous situations. Then the system can be used to protect the society. And also, what is more important, the Commission provide the definition of emotion recognition and expressive computing. So, hopefully, for many medical technologies or solutions supporting disabilities, not all of these technologies will be prohibited at public spaces. Also, it's very important that then you use assistive technologies such as a robot with emotion recognition. You use it not as a public system, you use it for personal use. So it's not the case for prohibited systems. It's a very important. So this category mostly focus on public. Then you do not provide your consent, is a real time, is about scoring, and is about one side control. So these systems are prohibited. The next category is a high risk, and it's slightly even more complex because here we also can find the emotion recognition, but in other more general environments and cases. And here, basically, they put the robotics or assistive technologies in the same category as the infrastructure, city technologies, work technologies, other law enforcement system, medical devices, making it so now we have requirements to provide the documentation, the proof of a high quality data sets, oversight and agency, and the process how this data was collected. But here, I would love to make a one comment. For instance, in my area of work of a medical technologies or assistive technologies, this approach is not new. And AI Act is not new in terms of bringing these requirements. Even before, companies working on AI for dyslexia, for autism, or medical devices actually needed to provide these proofs and documentation, not only due to the AI laws, but due to the medical regulation, healthcare regulation, and different standards they will need to align to. So it was not unique. And this proof of how the data was obtained, what was the process of a training, um, how exactly they communicate with the patient, with the other stakeholders, with the caregivers, what's the level of a privacy. It's not new. So hopefully this system will continue to exist here. And I'm quite happy with now we don't have this black box, because one of the issue we had in the past is evaluators. EU has a very extensive funding program for startups and emerging technologies from the government. And many programs are funded by European Commission, specifically Horizon Europe. And in the past, some projects or companies were rejected from funding, and they wondered why, due to some human-centered criteria. But they didn't know what this fairness, what this human centricity. With the AI Act, they actually have this sense what exact requirements to transparency, to the training data, and so on. And another good news for them is the introduction of a regulatory sandboxes. Regulatory sandboxes will be specific authorities which will help the companies which produce a high risk system and algorithms to train their models and provide them clear definitions, clear understanding of a compliance, and help them to deploy this system. It's slightly similar to Digital Services Act, which regulate digital platforms, e-commerce. There are digital service coordinators, also specific authorities in EU, which help to both regulate this system at the level of the member states, but also provide the feedback, the clarification, the guidelines, and so on. So it will not be just a living under this regulation. No, the Commission plan to proactively work and cooperate with the startups. And the next category is a low risk. Basically, here there is no changes in comparison to previous provisions. Here, we mostly focus on digital and online platforms and different type of recommendation personalization algorithms. By the way, almost over a decade ago, my career and work was focused on building companies and technologies focused on such algorithms. These systems are low risk, and here we are mostly focused on requirements to transparency and user consent and code of conduct, but there is no such severe compliance as a similar to high risk. And also, there are some examples of no risk. It's not so clarified as was before. So now EU prefer kind of a connect together, low and no risk, because there's a very thin line. Typically, here we talk about the games, which could use AI. But after some consultation in meetings I had, I'm sure many of the computer games can go to both low or even high risk. Why? Because they use virtual reality and many mechanisms which actually close to what we call manipulation. Because we now have monetization in computer games, in many time of incentives with push people buy something or spend a lot of time. And I'm sure with the more and more growth of this market and use of algorithms and personalization here, I'm sure maybe the risk of this system will be increased. Also, the Commission introduced two categories, not risks, but focus on more quality of the systems. First, as a specific transparency risk, it means that if you use AI in your system, you must notify the user about this. No matter what type of a risk we have here, we must notify the user about the use of AI. Second, if you use AI generated content, you must label this content as AI generated in order to avoid deepfakes, in order to avoid AI generated media and media outlets, and so on. Yes, I think it's the main categories.
Okay, so thank you. So let's talk about the high risk, right? And because I see most of the companies, most of the technology will come into that category, the one that needs to be monitored for, that you have guardrails for. What are some of the risks and guidance for avoiding risks around affective computing? Can you talk a little bit about that? Meaning, how do you, if that is in place, we talked about transparency. So let's take a look at, the trusted pillars that, I like to talk about, which I had created 5 years ago. That's security, that's privacy, explainability, right? If we are saying, let's say, a system has explainability, can a regular consumer understand what that means? Once you do, so as we are looking at, how is the algorithm producing the results is producing? That is the intent, right? But some of the more complex systems, more, for example, deep neural network systems, you can't really get that much of visibility into what they are, how they are coming into that, conclusion. And even if you do, will that make sense to somebody who's asking for, how did you come to this?
Yes, it's a good question. Hopefully, I work in the area where we were pushed, and we must be very transparent for many years, regardless of the AI Act or if AI Act would never exist. So, if we talk about medical technologies or assistive technologies, you know that it's one of the example of a decision tree, in one of the most transparent way to explain something. So, what we do, for instance, with the social robotics for autism or disabilities, first of all, we have a different content for different stakeholders, which explain how the model look like, how the system look like. We have detailed instructions for educators, for teachers, for children, for a parent, and also we have this and kind of a backside of a system. It's also reports for someone who will audit the system. So it's a both front end and back end, and the content would help to explain it from different side because one of the ways to achieve this transparency is actually have this specific language in content addressed to different type of stakeholders. The second, they actually always have these different interfaces. So as I've mentioned, when we build, for instance, AI for autism, we have a different apps for a child and for a parent, literally speaking to the person so the person could understand how this app works, how AI is involved, how AI support and help them, literally talking to them in their language. And what I expect to have soon is a more standards of auditing from external perspective. It's in the process because many of these companies and technologists still waiting for to study the AI Act to receive more specific guidelines. Let's say in EU is a digital SME association or some specific organization helping small businesses or startups to understand this legal language, but very soon they will explain it and we will receive a more specific standards of auditing the system, assessing it for different type of adoption strategies, environments. Also, it's important to mention that AI Act doesn't override existing
Right.
regulation and legislation. It means that it will still exist along with the Ministry of Healthcare or Ministry of Education and other ICT, which have their own requirements to the documentation. And all of them actually push these companies and technologies to particular ways to address explainability and transparency, the reporting process, and so on. And also coming beyond the AI Act, just look at this, what happened with the Digital Services Act, which introduced this special transparency report for the large online platforms.
Right.
Twitter, X already published the whole list of a number of moderators behind the X. How this moderator involved in different languages, how many moderators are aligned, for instance, assigned for English, for French, for Indian, for Arabic. So the public society now have all of this statistic, how social networks moderate the content globally. And it's just the beginning, and I'm sure we will have similar things for AI Act and for medical educational technologies. And there is a big work from our allies, such as the World Health Organization, who also provide this recommendation and guidelines. UNESCO, by the way, both UNESCO and UN work on a very big initiative signed by 193 countries focused on protection of children online in digital platforms.
Mhm.
And they also work on transparency issues behind the algorithms and systems. So every interface and application should be clear and explainable. not only for, let's say, general user, but for the child, for the elder, for individual with disabilities, and you will be must provide necessary accessibility tools to make it actually accessible for everyone.
I personally like that a lot more than having a separate category, specific development, just because I think this is a part of the whole, right? This is our everybody's reality that we have the kind of biases, the kind of, treating this as a bias, but the kind of consideration that has to be given to any particular subset, that should be factored in right from the beginning, and it should be part of any system that is being built, for one. And the other aspect is for assistive technology, yes, those are there are certain rules to encapsulate and to integrate right at the outset. So I am very enlightened by this whole conversation, and thank you. Like to see if you would like to share anything as a concluding remark.
Um, Yes, it's a very good question. Before the AI Act was introduced, many people ask me what my opinion, because nowadays people always call me like the advocate of AI Act, and some of my suggestions were added there, and specifically the final provision reflect these things and ideas about emotional recognition. But actually, the AI Act could dramatically damage my work. Why? Because I create the portfolios of assistive technologies. They use eye tracking, emotional recognition in some way, and so on. So technically, if not introduced properly, it could eliminate many solutions supporting individuals with disabilities. There is a 1.6 individuals with disabilities globally. So it's a significant problem which exists globally. And that's why I'm actually trying to cooperate to achieve this balance between technologists and policymakers, because we should understand, on one hand, AI system could support many, many people globally.
Right.
Fully smart wheelchairs, bionic limbs, supportive robotics, but we need these guidelines. We should not be in these black boxes. We should not create this silos. We need to create this fairness, not only algorithmic, but also economic fairness. And that's why I'm frequently talk about Digital Services Act, because it focuses on economic fairness along with the Digital Market Act, because it helped to regulate economic power and actually limit this potential of businesses to create this data silos as well. And that's why if you check the documents of the, for instance, AI Act and Digital Services Act, you will find some similarities, such as a invisible risk. Manipulation is Article 5.1 in AI Act. And so I'm very happy that now we have this comprehensive, not one document, but combination of frameworks from the governments, from UNESCO, World Health Organization. It followed by the global movement, Bletchley Declaration in UK and UK's AI Safety Summit, Biden AI Directive, and I provide the commentary as well. So we're really coming in the parallel. In the next month, I'm coming to Saudi Arabia to connect the dots in the Middle East in terms of both infrastructure, investments, and policies. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I hope to speak to you soon. Okay. Thank you.